Recently, I reviewed the Poseidon X Ambition Gen 2, which is a $750 budget gravel bike that represents seriously good value by anybody's standards. It's light, it's affordable, it performs really well, but there were a couple of things that gave me pause when it came to the component spec on the Gen 2 model. Things like the somewhat outdated square taper bottom bracket and the use of traditional quick-release hubs, to me, made the Gen 2 slightly less attractive than some of its competitors. But the Gen 3 addresses those concerns and adds some additional value as well, all while maintaining the same price point. In this video, a close look at the new Gen 3 X Ambition from Poseidon, including all the changes and upgrades, as well as the very few things that I think could be improved. So the Gen 3 X Ambition retains the same relatively comfortable and stable geometry as the Gen 2, with, in my opinion, a great balance of short but not too short chainstays at 425mm, and a slack but not too slack front end with a 69mm trail for a size medium. The bike climbs extremely well, which is the result of a couple of things. First and foremost, the bike is nice and light. The alloy frame and the carbon fork help contribute to a complete bike that weighs in at 22.7 pounds, or about 10.3 kilograms on a size small with no pedals. Now for reference, lighter weight gravel bikes that are able to get down to that 20-pound mark or under, for instance, are generally going to cost over $2,000, so the Poseidon here offers a really respectable weight for its price. The other thing that makes climbing easy is the gearing. Both the X Ambition Gen 2 and the Gen 3 feature 1x drivetrains, and they both use Microshift Sword drifters and the Microshift Advent X derailleur. The wide-ranging 11 to 48 tooth 10-speed cassette is paired to a smaller than usual 38 tooth chainring up front, which is what gives the rider the low climbing gear ratios that make spinning up hills relatively easy. Now the flip side is that with a smaller chainring up front, you might run out of gears on the top end sooner than you'd like, but with 1x drivetrains, this is always a trade-off, and I'd pretty much always prefer a more comfortable climbing gear over some aspirational top-end speed that I'll almost never use. Now for reference of my two personal gravel bikes, I'm running both in a 1x configuration, and I've got a 40-tooth ring on one and a 38-tooth chainring on the other, and I have no complaints whatsoever. On the descents, the X Ambition is pretty good as well. A combination of the 40mm Continental Terra tires, along with the stable geometry, offer plenty of confidence when descending at speed. Now the stated tire clearance is 700C by 40mm front and rear, but I'm convinced that you can get at least a 42 or maybe even push it to a 45mm tire and be just fine. Now, something else when considering descending capability is the braking. And with the Microshift Sword levers combined with the compressionless brake housing and the Tektro mechanical calipers, the braking is actually really good. Now generally on budget bikes, the mechanical disc brakes can often leave a lot to be desired, but brands like Poseidon and Primos have definitely found a recipe for powerful drop bar mechanical braking on a budget. Now if it feels like I've sort of blasted through the bike spec, it's really because I want to talk about the updates on the new Gen 3 model. Now if you want more detailed information on the X Ambition in general, feel free to check out the Gen 2 review video down in the description. So as far as changes from the Gen 2 to the Gen 3, there are several, but the biggest change comes in the form of a modernization of the bike as a whole. The Gen 3 features through-axle hubs right out of the box, so gone are the days of purchasing the Gen 2 and then having to spend an additional few $100 on the through-axle conversion kit. The rear dropouts have been redesigned for through-axle use, and the front fork is actually a completely new design featuring through-axle mounting. The fork also does away with the two mounting bolts on the legs for a nice clean look. Now, I think the idea here was that on carbon forks like this, the weight capacity is pretty minimal, and I guess consumer feedback had suggested that people weren't really using these mounts anyways. The new forks on all the Gen 3 models also come paint matched to the frame color, which wasn't the case before for the through-axle upgrade kit, which was available on the Gen 2 model. Another big change is the use of an external bottom bracket rather than the older square taper found on the Gen 2. Now it's not really a huge upgrade as both bottom brackets will fit in the same bottom bracket shell, but it does modernize the bike quite a bit, and it makes it so you can easily swap cranks to anything with the Shimano Halotech 2 style spindle. And then zooming out a little bit, the aesthetic of the bike has changed quite a bit as well. The branding has gone from a sort of giant high contrast down tube logo to an extremely subdued Poseidon logo on the top tube. In most cases it's barely visible, and it offers a really clean look to the frame set, I have to say. There are also new colors available in the Gen 3. There's still going to be a matte black as well as the metallic interstellar blue, But new for Gen 3 is this metallic green color, which replaces the foothill green colorway from the previous generation. Now, I had a chance to ride around on the new Gen 3 for a couple of weeks, and the ride experience is basically identical to the Gen 2. The biggest difference in terms of ride quality is the tires. The Gen 3 gets Continental Terra trail tires, whereas the Gen 2 featured the Kenda Happy Mediums. They're both a 700C by 40mm tire, and they're both lightly knobbed, but I do have to say I have a slight preference toward the Terra Trail tires. They weigh about the same, but the Terra Trails just seem a little bit more predictable in my experience. Now, climbing and riding flats is actually pretty pleasant on this bike due to the relatively low weight and the low climbing gears. Descending, like I mentioned, is pretty controlled and it's very predictable with sufficiently wide tires, and I would call it a stable geometry. Basically, the bike it's really almost perfect, and considering its $750 price tag for the complete bike, it's really hard to beat. Now, amidst all the panic and the damage control going on in the bike industry right now due to the recent tariffs, it's hard to say if the price will remain at $750, especially since Poseidon's factory is in China, which is a country that's been extremely impacted by the tariffs. But for now, anyways, it seems like the price is holding at $750. Now, if there are any downsides to the bike, I would say perhaps, given the trends of 2025, tire clearance could be upped a little bit more. Now, I also realize that Poseidon don't want to cannibalize sales of their bigger, beefier gravel bike, the Redwood, but allowing for, say, like a 48mm tire on the X Ambition would really just check almost all the boxes, for me at least. Now, one other small detail is that you get 170mm crank length in all sizes. And again, in 2025, a lot of focus is being placed on rider-specific crank length, which does actually make a lot of sense. Riders with shorter legs should run shorter cranks. Now, from a cost perspective, there's probably some added cost here. However, other competitors in the budget gravel space, for instance, the Primos Dame and the State Allroad, do offer size-specific cranks, even at the sub $1,000 price point. So on the Poseidon, it would be a nice thing to see, but definitely far from a deal breaker for $750. All right, so there you go, the new Poseidon X Ambition Gen 3. You got through axles, external bottom bracket, new color-matched fork design with no bosses, and an aesthetic refresh with more minimal branding and a brand new colorway. Pretty tough to beat in my opinion, but if you have any questions about my experience with the bike so far, just drop them down. We'll try and get back to as many as we can. Thanks for watching, and thanks for subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. We'll see you next time.